With only Within only a minute, we had fresh glasses of water, and then the head cook came out to greet us. A few moments later, we'd be having some light chit-chat about how come the mountain's glacier hadn't completely avalanched down and flooded the basin. The chief politely interrupted, reminding that the lighter winters and the more moderate summers had tempered the water rates. He also said that the dam above the basin had finally been fixed by the Army Corps of Engineers, and that the lava hadn't heated the top of the mountain, only the sides. There'd still been enough to where some of the snow had slumped down and blocked the passes, but it had leveled out and froze overnight, then gently thawed back out. It sounded like a good enough reason for me, as I wasn't very familiar with how all that would play out. In perfect conditions, the basin would probably have been 20 feet underwater and slowly emptying out into the Pacific. It would flood the other low-lying towns in the way, but apparently it wasn't that catastrophic. He reminded us that it had been a nastier winter this year, though, and we wouldn't be as lucky if we had a huge thaw and rain at the same time. We both nodded, and with that he explained how he was going to cook our veggies and asked if we wanted salmon, crab, or shelled fish. I wanted the salmon, of course, and my group's coordinator said he wanted the crab. The cook thanked us both and went back to his work. I mentioned to the coordinator that it was a mighty fine cook we seemed to have. He nodded and said that was also the chief, and grinned. I nodded, thinking to myself how I always showed everyone equal respect, just in case they are the chief chef someday. It's always about treating people respectfully, even if you don't know. That raised a good question for me to ask. Is this where we've been getting our little bits of extra fuel from where everything ran out? Well, yes and no, he cryptically responded. Remember, it wasn't a total collapse. The UN had been bringing in a little fuel, which the city-states got most of. California Free State also had been bringing up some, but we hardly see none of that either. I thought for a second, and thought, we were getting fuel snuck over the mountains for a bit when the conditions were good, but not so much over the winter months. I nodded to show I was listening. Some homemade corn chips were brought out, and we started snacking. I heard something pull into the parking lot a lot that sounded darn near as powerful as a legit race car. The engine was both painful and beautiful to listen to, even from the back of the restaurant. It sounded strangely familiar, like I'd heard it before. The vehicle revved a few times and did a circle around the restaurant before pulling back into the front to rest. As it zoomed by, almost sideways with torque, I got a fairly decent look at it. There was a supercharger bursting out of the hood, and the car was painted matte black. There were side pipes with actual flames coming out as the stealth-shaped Falcon twisted in an arc, painted on the hood. In the trunk of the car, 2 giant fuel tanks able to multiply the distance of the vehicle exponentially. I heard it circle around the restaurant and then come to a halt out front. The engine revved a few times with burning squeals, and I heard boots hit the gravel. The driver came in and delivered an envelope to the person at the front reception area. Seconds later, someone else came out and brought the gentleman 2 large bags designed for food takeout. He nodded and tilted his circular brimmed hat. He was given another envelope, which he tucked inside his jacket into a hidden pocket. With that, he did an about-face and headed to his idling vehicle. Seconds later, we heard him peeling out and flying off. Sure familiar-looking car, I mentioned with a smirk. My dining counterpart let out a quiet chuckle. Pretty badass car, indeed. We both sat in silence thinking about the mysterious rider and his envelopes, and soon our food arrived. I couldn't tell if the food was amazing or if I just hadn't had real food in a while. It seemed like a little bit of both. It had a sort of simplicity to it while still feeling like it had an inherent value. It was probably the potatoes. I could eat a ton of potatoes, and it always made me happy. They were baked gently and not overdone. They'd been peeled to where the icky bits wouldn't be on there, which made them almost crisp up even better. I didn't put anything extra on them, They were good the way they were. There was a gold one and a purple one and a big one. The salmon also had been well done, but I didn't know how hard it was to mess up salmon. The chef came out to ask us how it was, and we both loved it. We talked strategy a little bit more, about how there were so many pieces that had to come together at once. I asked how we were going to get to the oil platform. His answer was always, "You'll see," and as long as we can get by the oil tanker that's coming in without being detected, we'll be fine. I nodded. Being seen and being detected were two different things. They could see us just fine and not know what they were looking at, so I figured we were going to be disguised somehow. He looked at his watch and I at mine. We both nodded at each other silently. I finished my water and grabbed my pack that was sitting next to me, and we both headed towards the door. My counterpart settled the matter of food compensation with the front desk, and she waved us off. I thought that was neat, and I waved back, and out we went. "Appreciate the food," I mentioned. "Quite all right," he responded in kind. His voice had notes of apprehension and urgency, but also finality. Chapter 5. To the Pier. Evening. Day 1. I peeked through the clear portions of the door, and then opened it outwards slowly. I looked and didn't see anyone, and he followed behind. I faced outward, looking for threats throughout the parking lot, and saw none. We both looked around the parking lot a bit after shuffling away from the door. My AR hung off me, neatly folded up to where I barely even noticed it until I needed it. My counterpart had an AK-74 variant, which used the intermediate 5.45 NATO cartridge. It was very similar to the 5.56 NATO cartridge I used. His sidearm was on his chest rig, and I hadn't noticed it before. "Hey buddy, that pistol, is that what I think it is?" I asked inquisitively, but also half-jokingly. He had a pistol chambered in 5.7, which meant it was a pistol that shot essentially a 5.7 by 28mm rifle round. The pistol had a substantial capacity, unequal distance, and accuracy was off the charts, and ridiculous piercing capabilities on top of that. "I never have got to shoot one of those," I pretended to say in a sulking fashion. "Sucks to be you," he said jokingly. "I know," I responded, matching his exaggerated tone, and we both chuckled. There were multiple layers of security in the parking lot. I assumed all the patrons and staff in the diner had been armed. There was 2 to 3 armed folk patrolling the perimeter directly at the building, and I now spotted 5 to 6 more patrolling the outer perimeter. I looked out, and the sun was beginning to hang low on the horizon. "Time to get going," I murmured unenthusiastically, but hopeful. We both nodded as an armed gentleman that was around 6'5" looked down at us. He returned our nods, but obviously instantly sizing us up and compartmentalizing us into a category as he strode by. We made the several blocks that we had to go in fair time. I reached into my pack to pull out my operator cap to keep the setting sun out of my peripheral vision. It was well fitted and fit snugly into perfect position. We made it to the pier in time to see the second team complete their gearing up. They were in a go-fast boat and were covered head to toe in black. They would be darker than shadows in about a half an hour or so. "Who are they?" I asked inquisitively. "That's the puddle jumper team," my companion responded matter-of-factly. I started to fit more of the plan together in my head, but tucked it away for later. The puddle jumper team finished fueling and gearing up, then tore off up the harbor, out of sight in minutes as we walked. We reached our destination further down the pier and saw our sinful squid team. They were standing in front of a boat that looked suspiciously familiar. It was no ordinary boat. It was about 100 feet. It was painted a different color. It surely must be a different boat. I made my way past everyone to where I could see the bow of the ship, and there was a name painted in the matte gray. Esther. "Get out of here," I said in disbelief without realizing it. Time seemed to freeze for a second around me as I saw a white mist move partially along the deck and then fade out. Time started again, and XPX came out from behind the bridge and saluted everyone. We all saluted back without thinking. I looked where the mist had gone and blinked a few times, but nothing was there. The ops commander I'd been traveling with for the evening pushed past us all and got on board to shake XPX's hand. They started talking, but I couldn't hear. It had been about 6 months since I'd seen XPX, and he seemed to be looking a lot better than before, which made me happy. In an all-black trench coat and circular brimmed hat, he looked a bit like an undertaker, except with a positive attitude. They both turned and looked at us. The ops commander counted, and we must have all been here because he told us to get on deck and stand at attention, so we did.